Good evening. During this election campaign, the party leaders have faced plenty of questions from people like me. But this is question time. And tonight, here in York, they will face questions from the audience, from voters. So, no desk for the usual panel tonight, just the four leaders of Great Britain's main parties, one after another, who will stand here and answer questions from our audience, which, as always, reflects the range of political sentiment across the whole country. Each leader has the same amount of time, just under half an hour, to respond to whatever the people here want to ask them. So first up is the Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Ed Davey, then the leader of the Scottish National Party, John Swinney, then it's Labour's Sir Keir Starmer, and finally, the Conservatives leader and Prime Minister, of course, Rishi Sunak. And as always, you can get involved in the conversations at home on social media. So, shall we get going? Please put your hands together for our first guest, Sir Ed Davey. Hi there, good to see you. So, Sir Ed Davey, welcome. Just to say that our rules here are pretty simple. For every leader, they are the same. You won't get interrupted, basically, if you keep your questions reasonably brief and you actually answer the question. My job here is to keep you to the point. So, on that, let's have our first question, which is from Alison Rogan.
The Liberal Democrats are planning to spend 5 times as much as the Labour Party in increased spending. Aren't you going to bankrupt the country?
Well, thank you for your question, Alison. The answer is no. We put forward a very detailed costed manifesto, and it's got a big health and social care package at the centre, about £9 billion, and other things, for example, helping with free school meals, with the cost of living. And we've shown how we'll pay for everything we've got in that. For example, we're thinking that some of the large corporates could pay more. For example, the oil and gas giants could pay more. They've made a huge fortune with oil and gas prices being so high. We've also said that the big banks, the tax cuts that the Conservatives have given the big banks, they should be reversed. That raises, for example, £4.3 billion. We've said to pay for our mental health programme, to make sure that there's a mental health professional in every primary school and every secondary school. There should be an increase in the digital service tax on the social media giants, partly because some people think they're responsible for the mental health crisis for many young people.
So when you say, Sir Ed Davey, you have costed everything, I mean, you're promising to spend a whopping £26.8 billion extra spending overall.
By the 5th year of the Parliament.
By the 5th year of the Parliament. There are some things I couldn't find how you're going to pay from your manifesto. So you want to sort out the court's backlog, you'll need to hire extra staff for that. I couldn't see where you were going to get the money for that. You also say you want to settle the issue of compensation for the WASPy women about pension changes. That could amount to up to £10 billion. I can't see any reference how you're going to pay for that.
Well, there are a number of tax changes we're making. One of the ones is to clamp down on tax avoidance and evasion. And although all the parties are saying that, I think we can say that more credibly because we want to invest £1 billion in Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs.
OK, so you're not saying in your manifesto how you're going to pay for it. You're saying now you're going to pay for those things out of taxation.
Yeah, well, we've said in the manifesto, in the costings, we've pointed to a number of tax rises, and I'm talking about the one of clamping down on people who aren't paying their fair share of tax. The way to do that is to have more tax inspectors. Her Majesty's Revenue Customs has been cut back dramatically, and they can't do the job. And so if you talk to the experts, they reckon for every £1 you spend in tax officials and the technology for HMRC, you can raise £18. Now, we haven't put that in our costings. We've just said an extra £7. So I think we've been quite cautious, and I think the money can be found. It's about the political will. And look what you can do with it. Our NHS is on its knees. It's on its knees. People can't get GPs. There's no NHS dentists. They're having to wait hours for ambulances. And on the care system, people are going without care. That is just wrong.
OK, well, let's see if Alison's convinced. Alison, what do you make of that answer?
Well, it may be a reflection on the Labour Party's expenditure plan. So who knows how much we can afford. It really is not a bottomless pit, is it?
It isn't a bottomless pit. Of course it's not. And I think our proposals are responsible. they're fully costed. I think other parties, frankly, are not putting the money in we need to rescue our public services, particularly the NHS. But our schools need better funding too. I've talked about the mental health provision that we want to make. But I think if you look at the cost of living, I'm very worried that children are going to our schools with empty tummies, that they're hungry. They can't learn if they're hungry. And when we were in government, we provided free school meals for infant children. Actually, we used a pilot that Labour had done before, to give credit where credit's due. But we put it in. The Tories didn't like us doing it. George Osborne did not like giving free school meals to infants, I can tell you. But now we think we need to go further. Okay. And in the cost of living crisis, any child that's in poverty really should be getting a free school meal.
OK, let's take a question. The very back there.
Isn't the problem, though, Ed, that you've got a credibility issue? We all remember the broken promise on tuition fees. You enabled Cameron and Osborne's austerity. So I don't think people are going to be convinced by what you're saying he'll do now.
Well, listen, those were... I have to say it was very difficult governing with the Conservatives. We couldn't get everything we wanted. But we were faced with a choice as a minister. You either had to stay in and fight inside the government or leave. I think the easy choice for me would have been to leave the government, vote against it and tour the media studios and complain. The hard choice was to stay in, roll my sleeves up and really fight. And as explained earlier, the Tories didn't want us to bring in free school meals. We fought for that and we got it. They wanted actually to cut spending on welfare far greater than happened. For example, in the second budget, when inflation was about, I think, 5.2%, they wanted to freeze benefits and pensions.
But the question is about
no.
what you agreed to, Ed Davey. Are you embarrassed by some of the things you had to agree to when you were in coalition?
Look, I'm not proud of some of the votes we did, Fiona. I'm not proud of them.
All right.
And I want to overturn them. And a lot of our policies are changing some of the things that we had to agree to back then.
Okay.
But look what happened when we left office. I lost my seat. The Conservatives were governing by themselves. The first budget of George Osborne, they cut welfare spending by £12 billion, hitting the poorest in our country. We stopped that, and people often, I don't blame people, but they forget what we stopped as well.
Let's take another question from Linda. Linda Hancox, where are you?
Britain desperately needs a leader who we can respect and trust. Your media profile has mainly consisted of horseplay on TV. Is this prime ministerial?
Well, listen,
we're talking, obviously, falling off the paddleboard many times.
I'll come to
going
the
down a
paddleboard in
water
a second.
slide.
I'll come to the paddleboard.
Going on a roller coaster, you name it, you've done it.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk through all of them. And I don't know what they've got in store for me afterwards, I have to say.
We did wonder if you were going to kind of paraglide in here tonight.
But it's a serious question. I'm grateful for it. I take your concerns and the concerns of voters very, very seriously. And if you look at our manifesto, we've got some very well-thought-through policies to try to do things like rescue the NHS. But I don't think politicians should take themselves too seriously. I think that's part of the problem in politics, actually. People are really disillusioned. They think politicians don't get them. And yes, it's been to grab a bit of attention, but when I did fall off that paddleboard in Lake Windermere, the serious message was about the sewage problem. The Conservative government, the water regulators, have allowed water companies to pump their filthy sewage into our precious environment, our lakes, our rivers, seas, and that's got to stop.
And what
I want to end the sewage scandal.
What about the roller coaster? What was the serious message behind the roller coaster?
The roller coaster. Well, that was the day we launched our manifesto, and I said politics can be a roller coaster ride, and boy, it was. But yeah, there were some fun ones. But let me give you another one where I slid down a slide in Somerset. It was during half term, lots of families and kids having fun, and I had some fun, yes. But we launched that day the mental health policy. We said there's a crisis in mental health for our young people, our children. There's hundreds of thousands of children waiting to get care, to get counselling, to get therapy. That shouldn't be happening. You know, it's going to blight their whole future if we don't get that help. And so we were putting forward, on the day I came down that slide, a very serious policy.
Man there in the waistcoat.
Yes, someone broke into my church and they were caught by the police, and then when I went to see them afterwards to see why they broke in, they said because they wanted to feed their children. And 30% of the UK now, the children are in desperate need, not just during the school periods, but outside the school periods, can we not raise, for lower income tax people, the threshold of the income tax?
Well, I wish we had the resources to do that at the moment. People are talking about the costing manifesto. We can't do everything. We've said in our manifesto, when resources allow, we want to do that. We did that before. The Conservatives said you can't do that, and we said we're going to do that, we must do that.
But it is about making choices, and you're making choices about certain things that you want to spend more money on than pretty much any of the other parties, but not in terms of making people pay less tax at the lower end of the tax scale.
I don't think we can afford quite that yet, but one thing we can do to help families with children, the ones you were talking about, sir, I think the two-child limit on universal credit is just wrong. I think it has to go. If you look and talk to the experts, they say the quickest and most cost-effective way of tackling child poverty is to get rid of that two-child limit on universal credit. And that's something that would happen really quickly. It's costed in our manifesto because it is a bit pricey, but I think it's the best way, and hopefully that means that family that you were talking about would have the money and wouldn't have to do that thing.
Okay, there's a question back here.
Your manifesto, is it just a case of you've went unrealistic about your manifesto because you're not going to get elected to be Prime Minister and your party's not going to get into power?
Well, first I'd say, sir, with due respect, the elections isn't over. I'm on here to try to persuade people in this audience and across the country viewing it to vote Liberal Democrat, because I think we've got great ideas. And I think we've been getting great responses.
Are you trying to persuade people that you can be Prime Minister?
Listen, I'm realistic about our chances, right? We've had 3 very bad elections. Everyone knows that. And when I became leader, I said my top priority was to defeat as many Conservative MPs as possible.
So do you think you can or cannot be Prime Minister? We might as well hear it from you.
Well,
we know what the polls
it would be
say.
challenging given the polls.
Okay.
But I don't want to put a ceiling on our ambition. And, you know, this is a bit time to go. I want to persuade you.
But what the question here is about is your manifesto effectively a wish list? So say, for example, you're saying everyone should have the right to see a GP within 24 hours. That doesn't really mean anything unless you can find the GPs, you can fund them, you can train them, and you can transform the system so that is possible.
Fiona, it's a very fair point. Can I take you through the GP policy? In the manifesto, we say we need to recruit 8,000 more GPs. And we've talked to health experts about how you could do that. It would take about 4 years, with £1 billion a year. That's in our cost manifesto. And there's several ways you're going to do it. At the moment, actually, there are people who have been trained at taxpayers' expense and have qualified as doctors, and they can't work as GPs because there's not the money there to employ them. How crazy is that? And we need to train more. We need to retain more. GPs are leaving. Some people in our country, they come out of our medical school and they go to Australia. Because in Australia, they're better valued, they're better paid. And, you know, isn't that crazy?
It may be crazy, but the question you're being asked is your manifesto effectively just a wish list? Because you're unlikely to make Prime Minister, you can kind of say what you like.
No, it is absolutely not a wish list. It's a programme for government. And when I answered Alison earlier about the costings, and I would urge people, they're on the website, go and see them for yourself. We put a lot of work into it to make sure we can afford something. Let me explain that one of my lessons from when I was in government before, and we didn't deliver everything, was that you shouldn't promise something you can't deliver.
What, like cancelling tuition fees?
Well, yeah, indeed. And what I learned from that process, there was 2 things, actually. First of all, don't promise something you can't deliver. And so when you have a cost of manifesto, make sure the sums add up. And I'm very confident that they do. Secondly, we lost some trust during that period. And we've had to rebuild it. And since I became leader, we've spent the last few years trying to rebuild that trust by listening to people in communities that we seek to represent, trying to understand their concerns. And in our manifesto, we've tried to reflect those concerns. That's why I've put health and care right at the centre. I have some experience as a carer, maybe we'll come on to that. But I've also put the cost of living as our key priority. I mentioned free school meals, talking about reducing people's energy bills through insulating people's homes. That's good for the environment. It's good to keep energy bills down. They're way too high.
All right, now you've talked about your record when the Lib Dems were in coalition. Let's get a question from Lela Violet Halloum. Where are you? Yes.
Thank you, Sir Ed Davey. In 2010, your party promised to abolish tuition fees, and that was the centre of your campaign. Now, students like myself are burdened with hundreds of thousands of pounds of student debt. How can my generation trust you?
Well, listen, I understand why your generation lost faith in us. It was a difficult government to be in. I've explained I had choices whether we came out of it and cart from the sidelines or try to get there and win things. We didn't win everything and we lost that one. And we got punished at the 2015 election. I lost my seat along with most Liberal Democrats, actually.
But being in government, whether you're in coalition or not, is always about making choices because money isn't infinite. And I guess the question here is, how can people like you and others trust what you say, given that you're promising an awful lot?
Well, as I was saying to the gentleman at the back, the thing I learned from that process, the whole process, fees, but other things too, was you shouldn't promise what you can't deliver. And I think we did in 2010.
And you don't think you're doing that now?
Absolutely not. It was the big lesson I learned. And I would urge people to look at our manifesto, look at the costings. We've said that money should come from all the people I've already listed in answer to Alison's question. There's another group that I didn't mention. I don't want to put tax up on ordinary people. People have seen huge tax rise under this government to record levels, and with the cost of living crisis, I don't think people should be paying more tax, except one group, the very, very wealthiest. They tend to get their income in capital gains. And we think capital gains tax on the billionaires and the multimillionaires should go up. It's essentially a loophole. They're often paying a lower tax rate on their very high amounts of money they have than many people who are working. That's just not right. We want to reform capital gains tax so we can get the money to do the things that we're promising.
So just building on Lila's question, I mean, obviously we do question time week in, week out. This is a bit of a different one. But most times the Lib Dems come on, 14 years on from breaking that tuition fees promise, it comes up. At least from one person in the audience. I just wonder how you feel about it and how scarring that has been.
Well, it's very scarring. I lost my seat. The party was severely punished. In 2015, that's democracy. And we didn't do well in the two subsequent elections. And when I became leader, I said to my party, we've got to wake up and smell the coffee. We've got to really connect with people. And we've really tried to do that. And, you know, it's work in progress, but I think the parliamentary by-elections we've won in this parliament, in Tory heartlands, the local elections results we've had, just this May, we pushed the Tories into third place. It hasn't been done for 30 years. That suggests that some people are coming back and trusting us.
I just want to talk, I suppose you talked about polls, and obviously you're doing quite well in the south of England. I'm from the north of England, Manchester, and, you know, you were quite popular in my area, and now it's sort of more Labour heartland. I'm listening to you, I am sort of convinced, but like you said, what would you say to people up north as well, like seats that you might not win? Why should I vote for you?
Well, I'm hoping that you like our manifesto and the things I'm saying tonight. There are seats in Greater Manchester that I'm really sure we can win. Hazel Grove and Cheadle in Stockport, part of Greater Manchester, we're looking really good to beat the Conservatives in those seats. And there are parts of the North England. I was in Sheffield earlier today with our candidate in Sheffield Hallam. I think we can actually beat Labour there. I'm going to Harrogate tomorrow. So there are parts of the North, but it is true that the vast majority of seats that I think we can win at this election are in the home counties against the Conservatives and in the West Country against the Conservatives, and in some rural areas like Shropshire and Mid Wales and so on.
Can I ask, is there anything you particularly want to hear?
I'm torn between Labour and Lib Dems, and I am convinced that, you know, what's going on, what you are saying. I work in youth justice, the things about the court are really important to me. So, you know, like Fiona's saying, how are you going to cost them? Like, what are you going to do to help, like, youth violence? Because that is growing in Manchester. So what are you going to do about issues, not just education, but, you know, youth justice and justice in particular?
Well, I mean, I'd actually be interested to hear some of your views as well, but let me give you mine, but do come back and give me some of your ideas. I mean, when I talk to some young people, including my own constituency, they talk about their fear of knife crime. Yeah. And I think that's really terrible, that young people are worried about going out of their homes to enjoy themselves, and some of them carry knives. Now, they shouldn't, but they're worried about that. And so we have to get beside those young people, obviously through education and schools, but also through community police. One thing that used to work really well until I think it was Boris Johnson, when he was Mayor of London, got rid of them. We had lots of community police in my area, and they were highly visible. They got beside young people, and they got the trust of young people. And it was very effective in tackling that sort of crime.
I have to say, because we're in a general election period, that you've mentioned a number of constituencies. The candidates for all those constituencies are listed on the BBC website. Feel free to check them out.
I was probably told not to do that, I'm
question
sorry.
in the back, the man in the blue shirt.
Would you enter a coalition where you'd have to give up some of your most important and closest policies to yourself?
Well, I'm making it clear that we're standing on the manifesto that we launched.
Yeah, you said that before 2010, but would you contemplate going to coalition again, given what happened last time?
I'm not focused on after the election, and excuse me, but I'm not, because I want to make sure that every minute that I get like this, and I often get it, is to put forward our Liberal Democrat values and our Liberal Democrat policies. And the more I get a chance to do that, I'm hoping I can persuade people to come over to us. And then the more Liberal Democrat MPs we have, the more influence we'll have.
But you have already admitted it's unlikely that you'll be Prime Minister given the polls. Do you not think people like gentlemen here have a right to know that in that likely eventuality, would you ever consider forming a coalition or not?
Look, what I'm being really clear to people about is that I want to make sure we maximise the Liberal Democrat number of MPs. We basically going to beat lots of Conservative MPs, I hope, a few in Scotland, a few SNP MPs, but I'm determined to focus in on that. I've been in politics...
So that's not a question you're going to answer, just to be clear.
Well, I'll explain why, Fiona. I've been in politics a little while. I've seen a lot of Lib Dem leaders, and sometimes they focused on what happens after the election. And I've noticed that when they do that, they don't focus on the job in hand, which is trying to win local champions and Liberal Democrats across the country, and I'm going to try and do that.
All right, let's take a question from France Gregory. Where are you, France? Ah, there you go.
Are you proud of your conduct when you were Post Office Minister?
So, just to give people a bit of context, if you don't mind. So, you were Post Office Minister. You refused to meet Alan Bates in May 2010. Alan Bates said he found that disappointing and offensive. You then met Alan Bates in October. And what you said to Alan Bates to begin with was that a meeting would serve no useful purpose. Are you proud of that?
Well, first of all, can I say that Horizon scandal is the biggest miscarriage of justice in our country's history. And my heart goes out to those sub-postmasters and their families who've suffered so much. I'm representing 3 in my constituency, and hearing their stories is quite harrowing. I made 2 big mistakes during that time. It wasn't an issue that cropped up much, but it did crop up at the start. When Alan Bates wrote to me, I'd been in office about 2 weeks, and I wrote to him and said, no, this is a matter for the Post Office. We don't govern it, and I'm not going to meet you. He wrote back furious. He did. And then I read his letter and said, well, I better meet him. And I met him in October, as you said, Fiona. I was the first Post Office Minister to meet him, and I listened to his concerns, his arguments about the Horizon IT system, the fact that he thought there was remote access, but there wasn't, according to the Post Office. And I took all his questions, and I asked them to my officials and to the Post Office. And they gave me a categorical assurance that the points that Mr. Bates was making were not true, that their system had been independently assured by IT experts, that the courts had looked at this, and they had found people guilty under a minute examination. And I wish I'd seen through that, but those are what I was told.
So the question is, are you proud of it?
Well, I wish I'd seen through the lies. I've had sorry for not seeing through those lies. There were many ministers of all political parties during this 20-year period who didn't see those lies. The courts didn't. And here's the issue that, because I've obviously reflected on this, because it's such a scandal. What I've come to the conclusion is our system of government, whether you're a minister or you're in the courts, it depends on people telling the truth. And in a number of scandals, the contaminated blood scandal, the Hillsborough scandal, the Horizon scandal, we've seen people not telling the truth, and there's been a conspiracy.
It also depends, in fairness, on ministers having a degree of curiosity. And as we saw, there was a Conservative who then went into the Laws who had got a degree of curiosity, and in the end, James Arbuthnot spent a lot of time uncovering that. I guess you didn't have that curiosity, did you?
Well, I think I did, Fiona, because I did meet Mr. Bates, the first person to meet him in that job, and I asked his questions to the post office, but I got those categorical assurance. And here's the point. What do we do when people aren't telling the truth? I think there are two big things to change the system for whatever the scandal we've seen. And the first is to get protection for whistleblowers. Because the Horizon scandal was actually only uncovered during a Panorama BBC programme in 2015 and then the High Court in 2019 because one guy who was an insider in Fujitsu blew the whistle. It took a lot of courage. And I think whistleblowers serve the public interest, but they don't have the protections, and we need to give whistleblowers far greater protections so these scandals are uncovered far more quickly.
Man further back in the blue shirt, yeah.
Should Paula Venables face criminal proceedings as a result of the bonuses she's profited on the back of the sub-postmasters?
Well, I think there were serious mistakes made by Paula Venables and the post office executives who were in charge, some of the lawyers, some of the people in Fujitsu. There's a public inquiry which I campaign for because the people who've done this appalling thing need to be held to account, and there's a criminal investigation which I totally support. I don't think I should prejudice that investigation or the outcome of that inquiry. I think the evidence that we've heard does speak for itself, but I'll let the judge in charge of the inquiry and the police make those final decisions. But I do hope, I really hope that people go to prison for this.
We've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. Let me try and get in another question. Ryan Dallow.
Good evening. As a 25-year-old university graduate living at home due to the high cost of renting or buying a home, what concrete steps will your party take to address the housing crisis and make it easier for young people to afford their own homes?
So you are pledging in your manifesto to build 380,000 new homes per year. That is more than any other party. Again, I couldn't find any mention of where the funding is going to come from for those homes, for people like Ryan.
Yeah. Well, it is in the manifesto costings. It's in the capital investment section.
Oh, yes, I looked there.
Yeah, which says 6 billion a year. So 6 billion each year over the lifetime of the Parliament. That's funded by borrowing because it's capital investment. So it is in
So it's by borrowing. You're funding it by borrowing. OK.
Yeah, because it's capital investment. And so we've said that there should be 150,000 new social homes built every year because they're affordable and they can be built in the right places. And our approach is a community-led approach because the current system isn't working. It's a developer-led approach. And they tend to build the wrong houses in the wrong places because they get more money for them.
But also, on average, you've had something like about 150,000 homes per year been built over the last decade. What makes you think you can just change all that so dramatically to end up with 380,000?
Well, it's not going to be done in the first 2 years, Fiona. No, we're not saying that.
But even within 3 or 4 years?
Well, I think it can. I think it can. It's happened in our country before. We're going to have to skill up. We're going to have to find
land. It hasn't happened for a long time.
No, it hasn't happened, but it needs to happen. It absolutely needs to happen, whether it's for young people.
Sure, it's just a question of how you'll do it.
Well, I've been trying to explain that we want a very different approach, a bigger focus on social homes. That means the state investing in council properties. You know, my wife, I met her on a Liberal Democrat housing policy working group.
God, that sounds...
maybe
what a night out that sounds,
Mr. Romance. But to be fair to my wife, she's a social housing lawyer, and she's now on the council in my area in charge of housing. And she's now in charge of the largest council house building programme in 40 years in Kingston. So it can be done. You know, my wife's doing it. I'm very proud of her. And I think it needs political will. The Conservatives aren't interested. It's really clear they're not interested in that. They want to play to the developers' tune. I think if you play to the community tune, it's better. And here's another reason. You know, some people say people don't want homes built in their area. One of the reasons they don't, if you ask them, is they say, well, there's no GPs already. You want more people here. There's not enough school places. The water infrastructure can't take it. So what you want is a community-led approach which deals with those issues. The developers don't want to do it. So if you have a community-led approach, you can deal with the infrastructure problems, and people actually will welcome more homes because they can see there's something in it for them.
I'm afraid I have to end it here because we're out of time for your allotted slot. Will you please thank Sir Ed Davey? Thanks a lot. OK. 1 down, 3 to go. So stick with us. Still to come, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, then the Prime Minister and Conservative leader, Rishi Sunak. But next up, would you please welcome the leader of the Scottish National Party, John Swinney. Good to see you. Welcome. So, rules the same with you. John, answer the question, keep to the point. That's the name of the game here.
I shall do that.
OK, let's take our first question, which is from Andrew Atkinson. Hang on, let's get the microphone to you. There you go.
Given the recent scandals and dramas with the SNP, how will you differ from your predecessors and project competence?
I think the honest answer is that we've had a very tough time as a party in the last couple of years, and as a consequence of all of those difficulties, I'm here to lead the Scottish National Party.
Should we just sum up those difficulties for those who may not be aware? So, you are the third SNP First Minister year and a half. The former Chief Executive of the SNP has been charged with embezzlement. Nicola Sturgeon and another senior figure in the party are under criminal investigation. I should add, all deny wrongdoing. So it's been a pretty turbulent time.
It has been a turbulent time, and I'd be the first to accept that and to admit that. So my party's asked me to lead it through this election campaign and beyond the 2026 parliamentary elections to essentially do two things. To first of all, rebuild trust between the electorate and the Scottish National Party, and I've always worked throughout my political life to build trust and confidence with the electorate that have chosen me. And secondly, to provide the direction that's necessary in the Scottish Government to change people's lives. And that's my primary duty as First Minister of Scotland, to make sure that we change lives and to improve lives of people in Scotland. And I've set that programme out by establishing a focus on eradicating child poverty, on achieving the transition to net zero, on strengthening the Scottish economy and improving our public services. And by doing that, I hope to rebuild the trust of people in Scotland, which I accept the SNP has got to earn on a constant basis.
Andrew, where are you? Are you convinced by that?
Well, I'm an Englishman living in Yorkshire, but I have family in Scotland, and I've always been impressed by the way the SNP particularly held the Conservatives to account at Westminster, you know, held them to account for their scandals. I think it's been a real disappointment these last 18 months or so with the SNP, so that's why I'm hoping to have rebuilt, you know, on behalf of my family in Scotland.
I mean, how has it gone so badly wrong, John? Because, I mean, the SNP has been known for its discipline, its party discipline, for its stability. You've been a key figure in the SNP for a long time. Where's it all gone wrong? Well,
there's obviously been challenges about the issues that you've set out, and also we've got to recognise the importance of delivering on the priorities of the public. So when I look at some of the issues that we've delivered on, for example, we've recently expanded, or doubled, the availability of early learning and childcare for families in our country, so that every 3- and 4-year-old, and for many 2-year-olds, get access to full-time early learning and childcare, which saves a family about £5,500 a year per child. And it's policies like that that make a real difference to the lives of children and young people and families in our country that we need to deliver on. We've established a Scottish child payment, which puts about £26 every week into households of low-income families to try to help with the cost of living and to eradicate child poverty. Now, these are examples where I think the SNP is delivering to individuals and to households around the country to make that difference. And we've got to do more of that as we take forward our agenda to transform lives within Scotland.
This question from a woman at the back.
It appears the SNP has become a bit complacent given these scandals. Do you think that's because of the one-party domination of the SNP in the last 10 years? And should there be some change in the electoral system to allow for more opinions that might challenge the SNP and prevent this complacency?
Well, actually, if you look at the history of the SNP government over 17 years, the first 4 years we were a minority government, very much a minority government. For a further 5 years we were a majority government. For the next 5 years, we're a minority government, and we're back to being a minority government again. So we actually don't have that overall control of the political system. We've got to, if I want to get a law passed by the Scottish Parliament, I can't just instruct my colleagues to vote for it. I've got to win friends and allies. So on every piece of legislation, on every budget, we've got to win friends and allies. And one of the things that I think...
So why do you think the woman Back there. Sorry, what's your name? Grace. It says what she's getting from the SNP is complacency.
Well, what I want to make sure is that we don't have any whiff of that whatsoever, and that we work hard, as I answered Andrew's question, to win the trust and confidence of the public. And one of the things that really worries me about politics today, and I accept that I might actually have played a part in creating this, is the polarisation of debate. And I think there's a need to bring people together. And when I became First Minister just 6.5 weeks ago, I pledged that I would reach out beyond my party to other parties, to other opinions, to try to bring people together. Because I think what's wrong with our society today is that we're not together, we are polarised, and we need to bring people back together again.
OK. Let's take a question from Sam Grime. Sam Grime, where are you? That's you.
Are you going to carry on with independence referenda until you get the answer you want?
So are you going to carry on? Thank you, Sam. Are you going to carry on? No, absolutely. Very good to hear your question. Are you going to carry on with independence and referenda till you get the answer you want?
Thank you for your question, Sam, and I accept it's an important question and one that's on the minds of many people. I think politics nowadays needs to have people setting out what they believe in. And I honestly believe that Scotland would be a stronger country and would have better prospects if we were an independent country. That's been my view, my honest view over my entire adult life. But I'm a Democrat, so I accept that we can't be an independent country until the people of Scotland vote for us to be an independent country. And I do believe in the right of the people of Scotland to decide their own future. I think generally there's an accepted view that self-determination of the right of people to decide how they should be governed is an important political principle. And I think what politics today needs is politicians who will set out what they actually believe in, set it out openly to the public and ask the public to judge. And one of the frustrations I've got is that today in the Scottish Parliament there is a majority in favour of there being a referendum on independence and that Scotland should be an independent country, but we're not being permitted by the United Kingdom government to put that idea and that concept to the public, and I think we should have the right to do so.
Well, obviously there was a referendum in 2014, which you lost. You're now saying in your manifesto, I mean, independence is front and centre, that if you win the majority of Scottish seats at Westminster, 29, I think it is, that you will consider a mandate to ask the UK government for another way to negotiate independence. I assume that the opposite also applies, that if you do not get that majority of 29 seats, you will also take that as a democratic decision that you shouldn't be pursuing independence.
Well, what I want to make sure, is, and it's really related to the point that I answered Sam about a moment ago, is that the legitimate decisions of the people of Scotland in the election in 2021, where a Scottish Parliament was elected with a majority of members favouring independence and a referendum, that can actually be respected by the United Kingdom government.
But in your manifesto, you're talking about this election. So surely you can't say, on the one hand, if we win the majority of seats, Scottish seats at Westminster, that is giving us the green light to see if we can get another referendum. But if you don't win them, surely that is giving you the red light.
Well, essentially
but I don't hear you saying that.
What I want is I want people in Scotland to confidently vote for the SNP to make sure we can turn that manifesto into a reality.
OK, but just answer that question,
and we can actually we can deliver on what people asked the Parliament to deliver on in 2021.
If you do not get the majority of Scottish seats at Westminster, what does that tell you about your mandate to ask for another referendum?
Well, what I want to do during the election campaign is to encourage people to vote for the SNP
okay, so you're not answering that question.
To enable us to deliver on that policy commitment, which is right at the heart of our manifesto.
Are you going to answer that question or not?
Well, what I'm saying is that I want people to vote for the SNP to make this happen.
I think that's a no. All right, you've got a question here.
Yeah.
Hang on, let's get a microphone to you.
So I'm a Scottish person working now in England. I work for the manufacturing sector, which you know at the moment is struggling for growth all the way through the UK. With the SNP, it seems to me that every problem is, as you guys keep saying, the road leads to Westminster. I don't believe that that's the case. So can you tell me specifically what the SNP would do to support the growth in the manufacturing sector? Specifically, please.
The first thing I would do is I would argue, as we argue in our manifesto, for us to rejoin the European Union. because that, I think, is the source of the problems in the manufacturing sector.
But given that you have to go through a lot of hoops to get there, first of all, you have to secure independence, then you have to get the EU to agree for you to become part of the EU. I think you want something slightly shorter term. I mean, that could be 10 years or something.
But my point is that there's a couple of big issues in this election campaign that really aren't seeing the light of day. And one of them is the disastrous impact of Brexit on the United Kingdom economy.
And you are, of course, free to offer that opinion, but that is not actually the question you're being asked. So could you answer that question, which is specifically what will the SNP do to boost growth in manufacturing? Well, that's your question, isn't it?
If I look at one of the things that we're taking forward in Scotland today, we've got what's called a Tech Scaler programme, which is designed to take new emerging companies that have emerged from our universities and in partnerships with business to essentially support them and to fuel the growth of those individual companies. And what that's about doing is taking new, fresh, dynamic ideas, the ideas of the future. There are things that are happening today in Scotland. You know, we've got a facility up in Shetland which is now going to start launching satellites by rocket into space. Now, if you'd said to me a few years ago, Scotland will be a satellite launching country, I would have said, OK, that's quite a big ask, but, you know, it'll be interesting if it happens. It's now happening. So innovation that comes from our universities can be fuelled with public investment, and that's what the Scottish Government is doing to support that activity, to strengthen the manufacturing base of Scotland and to strengthen the economic opportunities that we face.
Does that answer your question?
Not really, because the timescales, to me, it's a bit like the rockets going up to space. It seems to me
well, that's happening. Well, that's happening now.
Yeah, but you can take one example in one situation, but at the end of the day, we all know how much we all paid in time and money from a Brexit perspective. So talking about going back into that situation for the manufacturing sector is just not helpful. Okay. People will take a sharp and take a breath at that and think...
Shall I take another question? Thank you. Thank you for your point, because there's lots of hands up. So, the man here in the green shirt.
Good evening, John. As a long-term supporter of both your party and independence, you've just said 2 minutes ago you want to give us the confidence to vote for you. How can you convince me that you can lead a successful independent nation after it appears the party has destroyed itself from the top down, not from the bottom up?
Well, let me perhaps set out some of the things that we've done. So, since we came to office, for example, GDP per capita in Scotland, the growth of the economy, has been faster in Scotland than in the rest of the United Kingdom. Productivity in the Scottish economy has grown faster under the SNP government than it has in the rest of the United Kingdom. I set out a moment ago the measures we're taking to tackle child poverty, which is keeping 100,000 children out of poverty in Scotland today. We've seen also the significant expansion of early learning and childcare, which is delivering the best start for children and young people in our society. So what I would say is that there's a whole range of decisions that have been made in Scotland that are good for Scotland, and that's an illustration of what an independent country could do if we had the powers, the broader range of powers, because I accept we need to improve economic performance in Scotland. We need to eradicate poverty, child poverty within our society, and we can only do that if we have the broader range of powers, and we've demonstrated with the limited powers that we've got how we can make a difference.
Well, on that point, let's hear a question from Tina Greenwood. Keep your hands up if you want to ask, because I will come to you later, but Tina, whereabouts are you? Ah, there you go.
If no more funding comes through from Westminster, how will you fix the NHS in Scotland?
So the NHS, just for this, forgive me, John, just for those who you know, south of the border who may not be aware, so the NHS is a devolved department in Scotland, which means that you control, you get a block grant from the UK government overall, but you decide how much you want to spend on the NHS. And just to put that into context, in Scotland, just over 7,000 people are waiting over 2 years for treatment. In England, it's just under 300.
So the first point I'd accept, Tina, what I want to say in response to your question, is that I accept there are some very significant challenges in the National Health Service in Scotland today. And some of that's a product of the impact of COVID and the necessity of trying to catch up on cases that were delayed. And we're making headway on the long waits that Fiona just put to me in the additional part of the question. So I accept, first of all, that there's a real challenge in the National Health Service, and we need to put more funding in to do something about that. Now, there's two elements to the funding we have available to us. There's the block grant that comes from Westminster, which is affected by the same austerity and spending constraints that affect budgets in England and Wales. But there's also the money we can raise in Scotland. So we've taken decisions over the last 3 or 4 years to increase tax on higher earners so we could raise more money to invest in public services. And we now have £1.5 billion available to us that we invest in public services that wouldn't be there if we hadn't taken those decisions. Now, that's an example of how we're using the powers that we have today to try to address the very issue that you fairly put to me about the challenges in the National Health Service. But the deeper problem we have, and this is a problem I think that we share with the rest of the United Kingdom, is the long-term effect of 14 years of austerity. And I'm not hearing coming out of the UK election debate between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party the type of financial solution to the challenges in the National Health Service that we need to hear, because there's just not enough money proposed to be invested in improving the public services of the United Kingdom, and that would have an effect on Scotland as well.
Tina's question is, in a sense, Tina, you're asking John Swinney to kind of live in the real world, that if there isn't, you're nodding your head, if no more funding does come from Westminster, how are you going to fix the NHS in Scotland, which is something that you are responsible for? That is Tina's question.
Well, my answer to that is that we'll put in the resources to try to address the most immediate issues about long waits, for example. So we've put in £30 million to address some of the long waits issues, and that's currently being deployed. So how do you explain that discrepancy? 7,000 people waiting over tiers for treatment in Scotland. In England, I mean, waiting lists are bad in England as well, but when it comes to waiting over tiers, it's just 300. Well, how is that happening? Well, I suspect what it probably is to do with is just about the nature of some of the complex health conditions that people are experiencing and how they are addressed. But there will be other indicators of performance. For example, Scotland has the best performing accident and emergency system in the United Kingdom and has had for the last 10 years. So there will be other aspects of looking at the health service to see how we're doing things differently that are performing better than other parts of the UK. And I can give you examples where you're also doing worse. And there'll be lessons that we've got to learn from other parts of the United Kingdom. But my core point is that I just don't think the election debate in the UK is a realistic debate about the investment that is required in our public services. I think there is a crisis created by 14 years of austerity, and we have to address that. There's a woman there with glasses, yeah.
You said earlier that you want to try and bring people in Scotland together, but how do you think you can actually go about bringing people in Scotland together when you're campaigning for a second divisive independence referendum? Well,
I think it's about having a democratic debate and coming to those conclusions, and having that debate in a respectful fashion. I bring to my politics a respectful contribution about other parties. I look at politics just now. I've been involved in politics a long time. I've never seen politics in as bad condition as it is today. It is very fractured, not just in Scotland or the United Kingdom, in a much wider sense. So I think it's incumbent on political leaders, and particularly on me as the First Minister of Scotland, to do all that I can to try to bring people together by respectful, courteous debate, and that's how I go about my business. Man in the blue shirt.
Hi there. So in 2016, Scotland voted as a majority to remain in the EU. Surely that means that if it's the Scottish people's will to remain in the EU, that we should be allowed another referendum on, say, freedom of movement, the customs union, or even if it is the road to rejoining the EU, independence, because that's what Scotland wants, to remain part of the EU.
Well, I think it's a very good point, because in 2016, Scotland voted emphatically to stay in the European Union. And one of the things we were told in the 2014 independence referendum in Scotland was that our European Union membership was guaranteed by voting no to independence. And 2 years later, the absolute opposite of what was promised actually came to pass. So for me, that's a very, very material change in circumstances that merits another referendum on the question of independence, because one of the fundamental building blocks of the arguments against independence was about the continuity of EU membership. And we've lost that, and people in Scotland are really suffering because of the absence of freedom of movement, the absence of access to the single market, the absence of access to the customs union. All of these things are undermining our economy and our public services in Scotland, And the sooner we can get back into the European Union, in my view, the better.
Let's take a question from Henry Cotton. Henry Cotton. There you are.
So Scotland's a world leader in renewable energy sources. We look at the wind, marine power. You have some of the best, if not the best, systems in the world. Why is your government backtracking on the net zero promises and actually going ahead with new oil licenses when you're such a world leader in renewable energy? Why would you not double down on that as a nation?
So what you're actually saying is not quite that you're approving them, but you're saying you're going to judge whether or not they are compatible with your climate change goals. Is that right?
And that's always been our position, that any new licences they've got to pass a climate compatibility assessment before they could be approved. And that's got to be a rigorous process.
So how will that work then? Because you've got the Climate Change Committee saying expansion of fossil fuel production is not in line with net zero. You've got global scientists, or scientists the world over, saying there is no way that you can have new oil wells, new gas drilling that is compatible with our climate change goals and the Paris Agreement. How do you think they can be?
Well, I think the Committee on Climate Change would accept, well, they do accept, that there will be a necessity to use fossil fuels, oil and gas, for some time to come.
Existing, but they are certainly not recommending that we drill new oil wells.
But the question is, because we've got a multiplicity of issues to wrestle with here about energy security and about the journey to net zero. And the one point I would make is that key point I'd make is that the journey to net zero is absolutely inescapable. We've got to do it for the sake of the planet. But the judgments we've got to make have got to be made on a case-by-case basis, where we explore and examine whether any new activity could be compatible with our objectives on climate change. Now,
so give me, for example, how it ever could be.
Well, if, for example, it passed an assessment in relation to energy security and also in relation to the sourcing of alternative products, that might well be a justifiable case. But that would have to be assessed rigorously in a climate compatibility assessment.
And when you say energy security, it would be sold on the open market, so it wouldn't make us any more secure, would it?
But also taking into account all of the issues about the utilisation of that oil supply, if we use oil as an example. So there would have to be a comprehensive assessment to do that. Now, the Prime Minister has said that he would authorise 100 new oil and gas licences. I think that's completely and utterly irresponsible. It is essentially to deny the climate emergency, and I would have nothing to do with that. But what I do want to make sure is that we can work with the oil and gas sector to support it in making the transition to net zero, because we will actually need lots of the skills in the oil and gas sector to be available to help us with the transition to net zero. And that's a key part of how that agenda would be taken forward.
Surely the first step in supporting that transition is actually saying, no, the line in the sand is here, we're not approving new licences.
Which, of course, is what your predecessor said, Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, essentially, we're putting a process in place to enable us to come to that judgment. And throughout all of our analysis on this, we've said climate compatibility assessments are critical in that journey. But I do want to stress the point of the importance of maintaining the skills base which will help us to transition to net zero, because we will need those skills to help us in that journey.
Woman there in the green top.
You talk about the climate emergency. What role will your government play in tackling the climate change, both in the UK and globally?
Well, we actually engage in a lot of dialogue with many Southern African countries, for example, about the loss and damage activity, where we became one of the first funders of a loss and damage programme. I had a meeting yesterday with the President of Zambia, who was in Edinburgh, and we were discussing the developments of the Scottish-Zambia Joint Exchange Programme, which is heavily focused on improving energy sustainability in Zambia, and it's part of the loss and damage work that we're undertaking, and also part of the international partnership work that we take forward. So I accept we've got a domestic responsibility for tackling climate change and net zero, but I also accept that we've got a responsibility to reach to other countries and to work with them and to support them, given the fact that as a developed Western European country, we've created our fair share of the damage to the planet, and we've got to address that in the loss and damage programmes with others.
Christina Rivas-Graver, you've got a question. Oh, there you are.
Yeah. Which Westminster leader would be the better choice for Scotland, Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak?
Well,
Come on, John, just answer that one.
You're asking me a very controversial question.
And we can't wait to hear your answer, can we, Christina?
And you're going to get an answer. Look, I think the Conservative government's been a total disaster and a calamity, so it can't be out of office quick enough, in my view. I think it's an absolute racing certainty that the Labour Party will win the election in England, and I hope people in Scotland will recognise the importance of having strong SNP voices in the House of Commons who will argue for decisions to be made in Scotland for Scotland, and that will put the interests of people in Scotland first.
You did get an answer?
I did, yes. First time.
Make a note of that. I've got about 2 or 3 minutes left. Anyone else got a question for John Swinney? Yes, you then, in the shirt and tie.
First Minister John Swinney, my question is about the threat of independence and how that brings two countries apart, essentially. Would devolution of powers be something, devolution of powers, to a bigger extent, would that be an option instead of full independence of Scotland?
Well, over my political life, a number of powers have been devolved to the Scottish Parliament. When I was born, the Scottish Parliament didn't exist. I was one of the founding members of it 25 years ago. So I've welcomed the development of that Scottish Parliament. I was also part of a commission that secured more powers for the Scottish Parliament in 2016. So we've strengthened the powers of the Parliament. So I'm never going to say no to more powers for the Scottish Parliament. But what I want to be able to do is to do the things that will transform people's lives. I want to live in a fairer, more equal country. I want to live in a country that prioritises the improvement of our economy and strengthening the rights and the responsibilities of people in our country. And I don't think that can be achieved for us in the United Kingdom, which is why I want Scotland to be like Denmark or Ireland or Sweden as an independent country. And when you look at those countries, they are more prosperous, they're more equal, they're fairer than Scotland and the United Kingdom. And that's a prize that I think people in Scotland are attracted to and want to make sure happens for our country.
OK. John Swinney, that's your half hour. You've answered most of the questions, I think. Maybe not all, I wouldn't say. But can you please thank John Swinney? OK, we're halfway through. Before we welcome Keir Starmer, I just got to quickly tell you what is happening next week. So on Monday, there'll be a Question Time Leader special from Wales with Plaid Cymru leader Rhyn ap Iorwerth. That's on BBC One Wales, the news channel and iPlayer, 7 o'clock. Then, next Thursday, we've got the normal Question Time with the panel, desk and chairs from Birmingham. And we're particularly looking for first-time voters in that audience. If that's you, go to the website and apply. And then finally, the following night, also in Birmingham, I tell you cannot move for Question Times next week. The following night in Birmingham, we have yet another Question Time special, much like tonight, but it will be with the Green Party co-leader Adrian Ramsey and Reform UK's leader Nigel Farage, and that will be on at 8 o'clock. So if you want to be, well, sort of interesting noises from the audience here. If you want to be in that audience, go to the website as well. OK, that's it. All about Question Time. Next week, back to tonight. On to our next guest. Would you please welcome the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer. Good to see you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okie dokie. Well, let me just remind you of the sort of general rules. Keir Starmer, we're very pleased to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Your job is obviously to answer the question, reasonably brief if you would, and if you don't, clearly my job here is to keep you to the point. So let's kick off with our first one, which is from Emma Mitchell.
Good evening, Sir Keir. You criticised the Tory manifesto as Jeremy Corbyn-like. Anything you want can go in it, nothing is costed. Why did you back his original manifesto in 2019, then?
In 2019, I campaigned for the Labour Party, as I've always campaigned for the Labour Party. I wanted good colleagues to be returned to Parliament. I knew we had a job and a half to do as a Labour Party because I didn't think we were going to win that election. Afterwards, because we got the worst result since 1935, the electorate clearly gave their verdict to us, and we did a lot of work on how we needed to change the party. And that started with what went wrong. And in all the analysis we did, people said they quite liked some of what was in our manifesto, but they thought it was too much, and they wanted to see something which was fully costed and fully funded. And that's why my manifesto going forward to this election is fully costed, fully funded. Everything that we say we're going to do, we say how much it's going to be, and where the money is coming from, because that's the sort of stability that we need. The other thing that's obviously happened since then is Liz Truss put forward a number of unfunded commitments, in her case tax cuts, and look what it did to the economy. And there will be people in this audience, people who are watching, who are still paying the price for that. And I said it about Rishi Sunak's manifesto because he's now included unfunded commitments in that. So he's repeating the mistake. That is a political point going into an election, I grant you that. But it is also really important because if you lose control of the economy, it's ordinary people, working people who pay the price. So many people, for example, still pay more on their mortgages. But that's why I said it, because I think it was overloaded, it wasn't fully funded, and I think that, particularly now in 2024, the base camp, the foundation, is economic stability.
Well, can I just remind you, because you backed that manifesto, you also said in February 2019 that Jeremy Corbyn would make a great Prime Minister. Now, you said already you thought you were going to win that election. But putting that to one side, you said he would make a great Prime Minister. Did you mean it, or did you have your fingers crossed behind your back?
Look, I didn't think we would win that election.
You said that, but irrespective of that, you said he'd make a great Prime Minister. Did you mean it?
It wasn't a question that really arose because I didn't think we were going to win the election. And now,
but we all heard you. We all heard you saying he would be a great Prime Minister. That was your way of telling the people here, vote for him. Did you not mean that?
I was campaigning for the Labour Party. And I'm glad I did.
But you also campaigned for Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister.
I was campaigning for the Labour Party. I was a Labour politician. I wanted to be elected or re-elected, and I wanted good colleagues to be re-elected.
Just answer this,
Some of the people around the shadow cabinet table were people whose seats were saved because we campaigned hard for the Labour Party.
Just answer this yes or no. When you said Jeremy Corbyn would make a good Prime Minister, did you mean it?
Look, he would be a better Prime Minister. Well, look what we got, Boris Johnson. A man who made massive promises, didn't keep them, and then had to leave Parliament in disgrace.
Did you think he'd make a great, not even just a great Prime Minister?
I didn't think we were in a position to win that election. And the more I look at the preparation we've now done...
That's not an answer.
The more I look at the preparation we've now done, the more convinced I am about that.
Emma, where are you? What do you think of that?
I'm not convinced. It leaves me with the same question about integrity and trust that I had with the clown called Boris Johnson. And also,
now, don't hold back, Emma, obviously.
I would like to vote for someone that I can trust.
So you're undecided at the moment?
Yes, I am.
And
yes,
has what you've heard from Keir Starmer persuaded you at all? Oh, we've only just started, admittedly, but you asked that first question.
I might have to give him the next 20 minutes.
OK. All right, well, let's have another question then. Alistair McCall. Where are you? Because I've no idea where anyone's sitting. There you go.
Sorry.
Good evening. How can you increase spending in the NHS, the care system and defence when you have promised not to increase the mainstreams of taxation?
Well, in relation to taxation, I do need to be really clear. We are not going to increase income tax, national insurance or VAT. And the reason for that is because I think with the tax burden being as high as it is and a cost of living crisis, that is the wrong thing to do, particularly for working people. So we're not going to do that. We will put some immediate money into our public services. I ran a public service for 5 years. I believe in our public services, and I know they need to be properly funded. So we will put in money to the NHS straight away, and the purpose of that will be to allow us to do 40,000 extra appointments and operations every week. That's 2 million a year extra appointments to bring the waiting list down, because it's nearly 8 million now. We've got to get it down.
And what about defence?
And that will allow the NHS to be properly, to get back on its feet. We have to then make it fit for the future.
And what about defence? That's also in the question. Where are you going to find the money for that if you don't increase streams of taxation?
Defence has to be the first priority of any government defending your country, and therefore we will always make the money available for defence. And you can see at the moment we live in a particularly volatile world. So we will make the money available for defence. We will put that extra money into the NHS, and I want to see our public services running properly. And, my wife works in the NHS, my mum worked in the NHS, my sister worked in the NHS, and to see it in the state that it's in now, where I say it's on its knees, my wife says, no, it's not, it's flat on its face, is a complete disgrace. After 14 years of this government, we will have to pick it up, put it back on its feet, but also do something else, reform, to make sure that it's fit for the future. That will require a different model, a preventative model. I'll just give this one last example.
Very briefly, if you would, because there are a lot of hands up.
I went to Alderhay Children's Hospital. Some people will know it. It's a brilliant children's hospital in Liverpool, where I saw heart surgery, or the wards where they do it, on children aged 0 to 2. It was very humbling and uplifting. But I also discovered that the single most common reason that 6 to 10-year-olds are admitted to the children's hospital there, same across the country, is to have their teeth taken out because of teeth decay. That is a complete and utter disgrace. So we need to move the model and change the model for the NHS as well. Thank you.
I'm going to take some more. Can I gently encourage you to move back just
just
so that we can see you more clearly for the viewers at home?
It's like that box inside the pitch in football, isn't it?
Well, you know, because obviously you play a lot of football, but you're just better lit there. So yes, person at the back in the pink top, yeah.
At the moment, tensions with Europe are at an all-time sort of high. With more and more right-wing governments in Europe, how are you going to negotiate that and make sure we have a safe relationship?
With Europe, look, I'm worried about some of the tendencies across Europe because I'm obviously leading a progressive party, and I think that the answers to the problems we face globally, whether that's climate, whether that's conflict, whether that's extreme poverty, getting our economy going, are progressive answers to that. Now, I will have to work, if I'm elected into government, with all leaders across Europe, but I will always make that progressive argument that in the end, you have to stabilise your economy, you have to get investment in to make sure that we get the jobs of the future, we have to take our climate obligations seriously and not see them as just a sort of challenge that we don't want, but as a brilliant opportunity for the next generation of jobs and play our full part in descaling conflict. You know, if we're able to get over the line in 2 weeks' time, we have a platform for that, which is really important. If you look across Europe, I am genuinely worried by some of the political trends and moves that we see. Thank you.
Woman here in the red top.
Hi. Sorry, I'm going to take it back to the NHS.
Yeah.
I'm a nurse and I work on a very busy surgical admissions unit. You're going about the waiting list and everything and putting money in, but how are we going to see that on the ward? Because all I can see is we've got pressure all the time, and say you're going to put more on the get rid of the waiting list, that's putting more pressure on the staff. So what support are you going to give the staff on the ward?
So that you can treat more patients,
yes.
That's your point?
The first thing I'd say is we'd treat you with respect. And I say that because we have a Prime Minister who, 18 months or so ago, said, I'm going to get the waiting list down, and he said, hold me personally responsible. And now he hasn't got them down because they've gone up, not down. He blames you. He blames the NHS staff. We will never do that because I know how hard you work all of the time, in COVID in particular, and then the waiting list. But we do have to take the pressure off the waiting list. Now, that is an ask of staff. It is an ask of staff. I'm not going to say otherwise because we will be working evenings and weekends to get those lists down. It will help because all of the hospitals I've been to say having that waiting list is a real drag on what else we can do. We will work, we'll pay the staff properly to do it. I'm convinced we can do it, by the way, because in St Thomas's in London and one of the Leeds hospitals I went to, I met the teams that are doing this already because they've decided they can't have these waiting lists at these levels.
We've got a nurse here. Are you prepared to do that?
Well, I don't work in a big hospital in London or Leeds. I work in Shropshire. And I don't think we see that the same. We seem to get forgotten about more.
But if you were asked to work as the Shadow Health Secretary is suggesting you work extra hours in order to try and treat more patients.
If you got better pay.
Yeah.
I mean, because at the minute all I see is it all goes on agency staff and the staff that are willing to get the pay, and we don't get the pay.
I think there's a separate issue though. You're quite right, which is we need the workforce coming in, so we're not using agency staff in the same way. And that requires a workforce plan, which we've also got fully costed to come in to effectively be the cavalry that comes in and gives you the support you need on the front.
But that will also take time, won't it? It's going to take years.
It will take time, but
it'll take years.
Yeah, let me just deal with this because I've been leader of the Labour Party now for 4.5 years, and every year we've had a winter crisis in the NHS. You'll be completely familiar with that. And what we do is we put a sticking plaster on that in about January or February. It just about limps through to the summer, and then the only guarantee is you're going to have another one next year and it's going to be worse. And everybody says, everything else will take too long, don't tell me things that are going to take 3 or 4 years, and nothing gets done. So we go round and round in circles, not fixing it. You know, sticking plaster politics is one of the biggest problems of politics now, which is politicians not being honest about how long it's actually going to take to fix things.
OK, well, be honest with us now.
If it's going to take time to train the staff,
Keir Starmer,
let's get started
be
on
honest
training
with
the
us
staff
now.
not put it off.
We know how bad waiting lists are.
Yes.
And most of us are familiar with some of the problems in the NHS because we all use it. So when can the people here expect to see an improvement in the NHS, be able to feel that they can get an appointment at least within a month, say? Should we wait 2 years, 3 years, 6 months?
We will start the work on waiting lists on day one in government if we're elected into government. I've set out the big things that we want to do in government, but also the things we'll do on day one, the first step.
And in terms of when we can expect to feel an improvement in the NHS, how long should we wait?
We'll get those operations going as quickly as we can with the staff. We've got the models from the London Hospital, the Leeds Hospital. We're asking those teams to go around the country to talk to other hospitals, maybe the one that you work in, say, this is how we've done it, this is what we would recommend. Now, however
so
long
for
that
example,
takes,
you're
but
saying,
we will get
how long will it take?
Make a start on that absolutely straight away.
You've made that
everybody
clear.
here will either be on a waiting list or know somebody who's on a waiting list. It's incredibly discomforting, and it means people aren't able to go to work,
so
and that's not helping the economy.
You're making an appeal, and we all hear it and understand it, to be realistic about how long things take. So your pledge is to get waiting lists down. When can we expect waiting lists to come down to a reasonable level?
It will we will be able to do 2 million a year on this model. That means that over the course of the Parliament, we'll get it down and clear the backlog completely.
By the end of the Parliament, that's your pledge?
Yeah, but hear me out, because this is difficult stuff. We did it last time we were in power. The Labour government then said, because the waiting list, you've all probably seen those charts where the waiting lists are through the roof when the Tories come out of government. We then bring them down.
Also, Labour spent a lot more on the NHS then than you are pledging. But
yeah, we got the waiting list the lowest ever level and the highest possible satisfaction in the NHS. And I'm really proud that we did it. And if we were still there, we wouldn't be in the problem we are in this country.
Let me take another question. Yes, woman here.
With all of the backtracking on policies from Labour, especially around education and education fees for higher education, why should anybody believe that you'll produce a stable and trustworthy government?
Thank you for the question on tuition fees, and I'm really glad to get it because...
Well, it's not just about tuition fees. Hang on a minute.
You said education
it's about
fees.
Yes, but you're talking about U-turns generally, aren't you?
Generally, you
OK,
haven't
so
looked to the
scrapping the two-child benefit cap.
Yep.
You were going to scrap tuition fees. You're going to nationalise mail, rail, energy and water services. You're going to have 28 billion a year for green industry. I mean, I could go on. I don't need to.
Yeah,
it's about more than just education.
Yeah, so let me address it straight on. Tuition fees. Very expensive for students. Don't work very well. Students come out with a huge debt around their neck. And 5 years ago, I said we should get rid of them. Now, 5 years down the line, the economy's been very badly damaged. We don't have the money to do everything we want to do. We do need to change the tuition fees. But I had a choice to make, which was, of the available money, do I use it for getting rid of tuition fees, which would help students, I accept that, because I know how hard it is, or do I use that money to get our waiting list down? That's a political decision that I took. I'm not going to do the tuition fees abolition because I want to put that money to get our NHS back on its feet. That is my decision. It's a political decision. I accept it's different to the position I put forward 5 years ago when the damage hadn't been done to the economy, but that's the position because I don't think until we get those waiting lists down, we can afford to do the tuition fees as well, so we had to make a choice about it, and it's a straight choice. And, you know, I'm saying this to you before the election. If you think that waiting lists down is more important than getting rid of tuition fees, if that's the right choice, then you'll go along with me. If you say, no, I'd rather the waiting list stayed where they were, bad luck to all the people on a waiting list, but at least students aren't paying fees, that's a different choice, not the one I would take. The other example that you put to me is nationalising energy. When we had the energy crisis 2 years ago, when everybody's prices went through the roof, both at home and in their businesses, I asked my team to mock up what the options were. One option was nationalising energy. That would have cost tens of billions of pounds. That money would have been spent on shareholders to buy them off, and not a penny could have been used to lower the bills. The alternative was a windfall tax on oil and gas companies to cap the bills of many people in this room and across the country, and to ensure that people could actually survive through the last 2 years. I took the second choice. I don't think I could have stood here today and say, I didn't do anything about your bills, sorry about that. You've all had to pay a fortune, but I did pay off the shareholders and nationalise energy. I'm a common-sense politician. I worked through the issues, and to me, it did not make sense to nationalise energy and not get the bills down. So I decided we should go for getting the bills down. They are political choices. I'm telling you what they are before the election, and people can then make their mind up according to what they think.
Well, that's what our audience here will be doing. Let's hear the question from Susan Purdy's. Is that you, Susan? Oh, that's you, right.
Given your severe criticism of the Conservatives on the topic of immigration, do you think it's acceptable at this point, so near the general election, for your own party not to commit to specific targets around this critical topic?
And you're talking about overall migration?
Yes.
Yeah. Look, migration is at record levels at the moment under this government. They've completely lost control. We need to get that number down. We need to get it significantly down. I'm not going to put an arbitrary figure on it, because every single politician who's put a number on it has never met that number. But we need to get it down. We need to get it down. But
you're asking, is that a reason not to do it?
Not to do it.
Look, we want to get it down significantly. It needs to be balanced immigration so that it works for our economy and works for our country. We need to get it down. But if we're going to do that, we need to understand what the problem is. And the problem at the moment is we haven't got the skills that we need in this country. So many, many people are coming on work visas. So we need a skills strategy to ensure that we have the skills in this country to ensure that the workforce is available here for the jobs that we need doing. One specific example is social care. Many people coming here are coming into social care and working hard in social care, by the way. But that's because we haven't got a plan for the staff within social care. They're on fragmented... My sister's a care worker. They're on fragmented contracts, poor terms and conditions, and many of them leave. Most of them leaving social care go to work in the NHS because they've got a better framework for pay and for progression. So we've got a problem we need to fix here, and we would have a fair pay agreement for all care workers.
In fairness, we're getting away from having a target on migration numbers.
At the same time.
How, if you are not going to set any kind of target, how can you know that the plans you're putting in place, for example, building something like 300,000 houses a year, or how many staff you want to have in the NHS, if you don't know how many people you're anticipating having in the country, how can you possibly know that you're planning correctly?
Well, we want to get the number down, so we'll see if that number is coming down.
You've made that point, but if you have literally no idea, or not that you're going to share with us anyway, of how many people you think is a sensible number to have coming into the country and staying here, invited in on visa, whatever it might be, how can you possibly plan for our public services?
Well, we've got a plan for our social care workforce with a fair pay agreement so that we retain the good people we've got working in care. We've got a plan for construction, for example, to build those houses.
But how do you know it'll be the right number of houses if you don't know how many people will live here?
Well, we need 1.5 million houses because too many people are waiting for a house that they want to live in. The dream of home ownership is real for so many people. They want to own their own home. The average age now for somebody to get on the housing ladder is 36 or 37. It is impossible, or near on impossible, for young people to get their first home. We have to build more houses. That means we have to take tough decisions on things like planning. I was at housing development here, just in Outer York this morning, 650 houses being bought by locals, but it took 15 years from the plans being submitted to the houses being built.
We are far off migration targets. Forgive me, Keir Starmer, but we are well off the target now. Let's get... I appreciate you've got the message you want to put out, but we also need to actually directly answer the questions being put by the audience. Kate Collins, whereabouts are you? Kate.
Kate.
Hi, Keir. 3 years ago, you criticised your MP, Rosie Duffield, for saying only women have a cervix. You recently backtracked on this. What do you believe now, and how do we know that you will stick to your views?
So Rosie Duffield said in 2020, only women have a cervix. You said in response, that's something that shouldn't be said, it's not right.
Well, look, on the biology, I agree with what Tony Blair said the other day in relation to men having penises and women having vaginas. But what I will say is
so you changed your position?
Just on the biology, that doesn't help on the gender. There are some people who don't identify with the gender that they're born into. And they go through a lot of anxiety and distress. And my view in life is to respect and give dignity to everyone, whatever their position. And I will always do that. And I was worried at the time, and you referenced that particular debate, by the way in which the debate was being conducted, because it got very toxic, very divided, very hard line, and we lost sight of people in that. So much so that that drags you to a place where we end up, as we did end up, with the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom making a trans joke in Parliament when the mother of a murdered trans teenager was watching on. That is a shocking place to get to.
All right. You want to come back in?
So the question is actually alluding to tolerance as well.
Yeah.
And having tolerance of differing views. And I do appreciate the comments you've made. However, how are you going to deal with when people in your party are going to come up against you? It's likely you're going to be in government. Who knows if you'll have a supermajority? And as John Swinney actually mentioned earlier, politics can become polarised. How are you going to reduce the effect of that?
By bringing the country together. I think this is such an important point, because politics is about the policies that you put forward at the election, obviously. But it's also about how you do politics and how you deal with difficult topics. I want to do two things if we get into government in 2 weeks' time, and they're about the mindset of government. The first thing is, I want to return politics to service, because I think it's got far too much into self-entitlement. Look at the gambling stuff that's going on today. Politicians who think that making money or self-entitlement is the reason they're in politics. So we need to return it to service. The second thing, to go directly to your question, is I want to take the opportunity to bring the country together, because what's happened in politics, in my view, over the last 10, 15 years or so, is they've become more and more divided and toxic, and everybody's trying to find the difference between us rather than the points of connection. And Jo Cox, who tragically was murdered, was a good friend of mine. We came into Parliament at the same time. Our children are broadly the same age. What she said in her maiden speech, that we have far more in common than we do which divides us, that is what I carry. That is what I want to have the opportunity, if we get into power in 2 weeks, to implement, so that we actually, we're good at this as a country. During the pandemic, people were looking out for each other. Yes, food, medicine, of course, but just the gentle knock on the door of a neighbour that perhaps we didn't know very well, to say, are you all right? We're a good country, a reasonable, tolerant country. We're pretty live and let live if we don't go down the politics of division, and I want to stop that.
There's lots of questions, so I'm going to take 2 or 3 in a row and then hand over to you. So, man there in the zip-up top. Yeah. That's it.
You state in your manifesto that you plan on removing the tax breaks for private schools. But do you not think that this will put further stress on the already strained state system?
No, I don't.
All right. So shall I take 2 or 3, Vicky, if that's all right? And then let's take it.
I'll just make a note.
Yes. Can we get a microphone here? Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk about housing policies and helping people to afford their first deposit. But I think one thing that's not taken into consideration is how much money is currently being spent on rent. So how are we actually meant to save the money? It's okay building houses, doing 5% deposits, but how am I actually meant to afford to save for that deposit if I'm paying all of that money in rent? And that's the second part to that. When will, your track record for paying rent count towards you being able to then secure a mortgage? Because there's lots of people, I myself, I pay £1,000 in rent each month, but yet I can't afford to get a mortgage. So when will that help?
Okay, so that's 2 pretty meaty questions. Let's start with private schools.
Look, on private schools, I completely understand that families up and down the country work hard and save hard to send their children to private school because they're aspirational for their children. But all parents are aspirational for their children, every single parent. And I want every single child, wherever they come from, whatever their background, and whichever school they go to have the same opportunities. At the moment, in our state secondary schools, we don't have the basic teachers that we need for things like maths. Now, that's really shocking, because if you don't have... Some people here and watching will be familiar with maths being taught by the supply teacher or the PE teacher, but not a designated maths teacher. That really impacts on the lives of people in our state secondary schools, because if you don't do well at maths, then that inhibits what you can go on to do in A-levels, and it will affect the job you can get and apprenticeships, etc., etc. That's intolerable. So I want to recruit the staff we need to teach core subjects like maths, so that every child, for example, has a maths teacher to teach maths. In order to fund that, we're going to remove the tax break on private schools. That's a tough decision. It's not an easy one. I do know how hard people work, but I've got to look at it across the board. I've got to make sure those teachers are there for all children, and make sure that everyone has that chance, so that wherever you come from, whatever your background. On the question of rent and mortgages, this is a real... I mean, you're obviously living it. But, you know, young people who are working hard, you know, on a reasonably decent wage, but then having to pay a huge part of it for rent over and over again, because rents are through the roof, the housing isn't what it should be.
Well, there's lots of people here who know how bad the problem is. You're asking very specifically, what can be done to help when rents are high, and particularly, will how much you pay in rent go towards being able to buy a property?
Yeah, so on the question of buying
change that
property, we
situation?
want a low deposit scheme, which is what we'll put in place, so that people who've proved they can pay, because they're often paying more for their rent than they pay on their mortgage, so the ability to pay isn't the issue, but they haven't got the ability to save for a mortgage because mum and dad haven't got the money and they're paying it all out on rent. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which is also important for those that are in rented accommodation, is we have to stop the landlords ripping off tenants who are doing, you'll probably be familiar, this bidding war, so that when you go to get a rented property, the landlord just does a bidding war. Who'll pay more, who'll pay more, who'll pay more, until people are paying through the roof. We have to end that.
How will you end that? So how will you end that? If it's private landlords, how can you stop that?
Well, we can pass legislation to say you can't do it, because it is driving rents through the roof, and it's not fair on people. It's taking advantage.
So what, saying
of the
landlords have
market.
to, take the lowest bidder? Or, I mean, what's the detail of that?
To put the process around how this is... You cannot have a landlord, but this is what we will
well, I appreciate what you're saying cannot happen, but I'm just wondering specifically, if you've got a private landlord saying, I want to give it to this person or that person, how do you legislate for that not to happen?
No, that's not how they do it. They say, one person says X pounds a week. Someone says, I'll give you X plus £10, £20, £30. They then go back to the first person and say, I've already had a better offer for X plus this. Will you out? So you get this bidding war going on until the rents go through the roof.
So you're saying they have to take the first offer. Is that what you're saying for private landlords?
No, we can't have this bidding war like this.
No, I get that. Are you telling private landlords they have to take the first offer then?
They have to. We have to have a scheme in place to stop them driving the rent up and up and up.
OK, I'm still not entirely clear how you're going to do that.
Well, no,
but you've got about a minute left.
I just want to address
which
is deposits. Lots of renters are paying huge deposits. And we have to stop that as well and make sure the conditions are good within the housing they're buying. But at the end of the day, there's no way out of the renting problem until we build more houses. Because without the houses that people can afford to live in and buy, then more people are renting, and that is bingo for landlords who are making a fortune out of this.
OK, our time is up, Keir Starmer. Thank you very much for all your questions to Keir Starmer. Thank you for your time with us here this evening.
Thank you.
Right. Are you still with me at home? We're in the home straight. We've got the last half hour now. So would you please welcome our final guest tonight, the Conservative leader, and, of course, our Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. Thanks. Nice to see you. OK. So we've got a number of questions. We've got about half an hour. I'm going to try and get through them. Let's start with our first one, which is from Kevin Dobson.
Hi. We've had 5 Prime Ministers in the last 7 years, and one of them managed to last for 6 weeks. As a result, I think we are something of an international laughingstock. I'm asking if you would confess to us tonight, even just a small amount of embarrassment, to be leading the Conservative Party into this election campaign.
Well, good evening, everyone. Fiona, thank you for inviting me. And Kevin, was that right? Yeah. When I first got this job, I stood on the steps of Downing Street and spoke to all of you as Prime Minister for the first time, and I acknowledged that. I said very clearly that mistakes had been made, and that's why I was standing there in front of you. In fact, you may remember I spent the summer before that arguing against the policies that my predecessor had suggested were right. I didn't think they were right for the country, and I said so. But what I'd ask you to do is judge me on my 18 months that I've been in office. I came in with one primary job, and that was to bring back economic stability after the difficult few years that we've had. You saw yesterday we had the very welcome news that inflation is back to target. Now, I know that that's only starting to make a difference to all of your lives and everyone else's, but that's the path we're on. And if we stick with that path, I can continue to cut your taxes, give you more financial security, and actually deliver on the things that I know you want me to.
So, Kevin's question is about character, it's about trust, it's about integrity, I think it's fair to say. We've got a question from Graham Donald on matters more recent. Graham.
Aren't these emerging allegations about betting on the election date the absolute epitome of the lack of ethics that we have had to tolerate from the Conservative Party for years and years?
So, just to be clear, for those of you who might not have kept up with it, 3 people are being investigated by the Gambling Commission about placing a bet on the timing of the election. 2 are Conservative Party candidates, Craig Williams, Laura Saunders, and her husband, Tony Lee, is the Conservative Party Director of Campaigning. They are being investigated. There's also an issue with a police officer who's been arrested. But these are 3 people connected to the Conservative Party.
Yeah. Well, like you, I was incredibly angry to learn of these allegations. It's a really serious matter. It's right that they're being investigated properly by the relevant law enforcement authorities, including, as Fiona said, a criminal investigation by the police. You know, I want to be crystal clear that if anyone has broken the rules, they should face the full force of the law, and that's what those investigations are there to do, and I hope that they do their work as quickly and as thoroughly as possible.
There are calls for them to be suspended. These are party candidates. But you're happy not to suspend them, to let them carry on and go on to the election. Obviously, they've not admitted anything. No one is saying that a decision has been taken about their guilt or their innocence. But you're happy for them to go into the election and represent you and the Conservative Party.
Well, Fiona, as you said, these investigations are ongoing. They are rightly confidential. One of them is a criminal investigation that's being conducted by the police. These are very serious.
Yes, but that's a police officer. Talk about the 2 party candidates.
All I can say is they are serious investigations. It's right that they are done thoroughly, confidentially. The integrity of that process should be respected. But what I can tell you is if anyone is found to have broken the rules, not only should they face the full consequences of the law, I will make sure that they are booted out of the Conservative Party.
Woman there in the white T-shirt.
As a parent of 17-year-olds who have grown up in the last 5 years against the backdrop of COVID and the shenanigans of the Tory party, what are you going to do as a political party to rebuild trust in young people and politicians?
There's a bit of a theme emerging.
You know, if you're asking about why you can trust me in particular, I'll tell you. Actually, very simply, right? It's because my grandparents came to this country with very little. And in 2 generations, I'm standing here as your Prime Minister. So this country did something extraordinary for my family. And I feel an enormous debt of gratitude to repay that. And I'm in this so that I can make the same difference to as many people as possible as the difference that this country made to my family. So I can happily talk to you about lots of policies like national service, helping your children get onto the housing ladder with cuts to stamp duty, getting them great apprenticeships. But fundamentally, I'm in this because of what this country has done for my family, and I will work very hard to repay that and make as many people's lives better in the way that my life has been transformed by being here.
National service is not something that young people that I speak to are particularly interested in. They do a lot of volunteering and things already on their own. It was more about the trust that young people can get from all politicians in the last 5 years, growing up against that, and the trust that can be rebuilt in politicians in general.
OK, I think you've answered that. Let's take another question now. It's man in a blue sweater and blue shirt, yeah.
Despite my personal support for the scheme, many of my peers at school, so I'm a college student, many of my peers can't see the potential benefits from the National Service Scheme. How are you going to enforce and also incensitise young people to take up the scheme?
Yeah. So, actually, I've been everywhere across the country talking to young people about it and talking to parents about it, and I've heard an enormous amount of support for it. And I'll tell you why. I was with someone just the other day who I'd seen in the evening, someone in their early 20s, probably not that dissimilar in age from you, and they were telling me about something that had just happened to them that afternoon. They had seen an elderly person fall and damage their hip quite badly, and because they had volunteered with St John's Ambulance, they were able to help that person and be with them, give them some sense of reassurance, get the ambulance there, and that person was incredibly grateful. And then I was talking to this person a little bit more, and they were explaining how they'd got into St John's Ambulance because they'd been through a difficult time in their lives, and it was something that they did to give them a sense of purpose and contribution to society, and they found it a really fulfilling and meaningful experience, as well as, in that case, giving them some skills, practical skills, that have allowed them to help other people in their life. And that's why I think national service is a good idea.
So,
that one person's example is a great reason to spread this to as many people as possible, make sure everyone can have those skills and opportunities, have a sense of contributing to something bigger than themselves. I think that gives people meaning and purpose, and also contribute to our country's overall resilience and security. And that's why, as I said, that one story encapsulates, I think, very well why this is a great idea.
So you say you've been talking to young people, you've got us that one story. Have you also been talking to your former Chief of the Naval Staff, who says it's bonkers? And the former Chief of the General Staff, who says it's electoral opportunism. Have you spoken to them?
I've spoken to lots of people in the armed forces. Well, I wouldn't be appropriate, Fiona, to start politicising the armed forces in an election campaign.
Well, it's just they've been very critical of your campaign, and given they know a bit or two about the army, I wonder if you thought you might find out why they're so critical.
Because I've spoken to lots of people in the armed forces, and they themselves have been working on schemes to make it easier for young people to engage with the armed forces. That's something that they themselves have been working on. Those are the conversations I've been having with them for many months. And it's really important for people to know the military option is optional. Right? No one's going to be forced to do it. It's actually going to be very selective,
Well, the whole
competitive.
thing's going to be optional, isn't it?
National service will be compulsory. The military option will be something that people choose to do.
Oh, I see. So how will you make people do it?
Sorry?
If national service is going to be compulsory, how will you make people do it?
Well, you'll have a set of sanctions and incentives, and we will look at the models that are existing around Europe to get the appropriate mix of those. There's a range of different options that exist.
For example?
There's all sorts of things that people do across Europe, whether that's looking at driving licences, other access to finance, all sorts of other things. The right thing to do is to allow...
Access to finance?
Yes.
So if people don't want to do national service, what, you're going to take their bank cards away? What do you mean?
There's access. there's lots of different models around Europe. There's lots of different models around Europe. This is being done in multiple countries in Europe.
I don't doubt it. I'm just asking you what you think.
So there's a range of things, and we will have a Royal Commission look at all of those, come back to the government and recommend what the appropriate mix of incentives and sanctions is.
Man here in the blue shirt.
4.5 years ago, the Conservative Party campaigned on the oven-ready deal so that Brexit would be done and it'd be great for the country, and that was the heart of your election promises. Why now, 4.5 years later, aren't you saying, look how great Brexit's been for us? It's something that's absent from your manifesto. And what's happened with Brexit has been particularly affecting to young people, their ability to work and educate abroad. And we've benefited from Europe. We've benefited from low house prices, from good pensions. We're throwing young people into the fire, and I just don't see anything that you're doing for them.
So just to be clear, is your question about Brexit? Is your question about Brexit or about young people?
I mean, look, it's about how Brexit has denied young people a future.
Well, look, we had all these debates several years ago. I'm not going to relitigate them. We had a referendum, and the country decided, and now the job is to get on and make sure we realise all the benefits of that. And actually, you don't have to go very far from here to see it in a very tangible way for young people. In Teesside, there's something called a free port, which is a special investment zone that we created using our freedoms from Brexit. It's attracting billions of pounds of investment, creating thousands of incredibly high-quality jobs. I was there recently talking to young apprentices who are now doing fantastic careers in the growth industries of the future, incredibly excited about what that is for them and what that means. And
you
that's
could
just
have
one of the
open free
examples
ports
of
without
things that we're
leaving
doing.
the EU, Prime Minister, as you know.
No, you can't have in the same way, Fiona.
Perhaps in the same way, but you could open free
it's
ports
how
without
we've
leaving
done
the
them.
EU.
It's exactly how we've done them that means we are attracting the investment and creating the jobs, which is already making a difference to so many people's lives. And that is a very practical example of what we've done. But look, the choice, sir, at this election is about the future. We're not going to go back to Brexit, right? This is about the future. And when it comes to the economy And when it comes to making sure people who are working hard have the opportunities they deserve, right, what I want to do is build on the progress we've made and give you and every other young person that you're concerned about the opportunity to get a job with a new apprentice, if that's the right thing for them, and then keep more of their hard-earned money by cutting their taxes. That is what I want to do for people. And actually, outside of the EU, we're able to do things that will drive more growth, create more jobs that will allow me to cut more taxes. That's the choice at this election.
Can we take a question from Ronald Thorne? There you are.
Mr Sunak, recent figures show NHS waiting lists have more than doubled under your government. What message have you got for those who were on waiting lists, particularly those who have been on there for more than 1 year?
Yeah. Well, Ronald, first thing, it was Ronald, wasn't it? Yeah. I come from an NHS family, so I was raised with people, surrounded by people who dedicated their lives to trying to make their patients' lives a bit easier. And that's what I spent my childhood doing and working in. So the NHS matters to me personally. And we haven't made as much progress as I would have liked tackling waiting lists in the last 18 months.
And you haven't kept your pledge either, which was to bring waiting lists down.
We have not made
Or specifically,
as much
you made a pledge and you've broken
as we would have liked, as I would have liked, right? But what I can tell you is we are putting record investment into the NHS. We've got more doctors and nurses working in it than we ever have, and we're training more. And we're doing different things, making sure that we can diagnose people's cancers earlier by doing scans closer to their homes, allowing you to do more things at your pharmacy to get the treatment that you need quicker. And those things are starting to make a difference. And what we've seen over the past few months is waiting lists now are starting to come down.
They've just gone up.
Over the past few months, over the past 5 months, they've gone down by around 200,000.
Well, they're still higher than where you were paying.
Yes,
and they have literally just gone up. I'm sure you haven't forgotten.
I freely acknowledge that.
OK, I just want to be clear.
freely acknowledge that. But Fiona, this is an important point. Right? Inflation yesterday hit 2%. When I became Prime Minister, it was 11. Now, that is something that I said I would do, and we've done it. Now, these things don't happen overnight. They don't happen in a straight line. But if you have a plan and you stick to it, you can get the results. You've seen that on inflation. You've seen me stick to a plan. And yes, during that period, it popped up a couple of times and everyone said the same. And I said, if we stick to it, we will get it there. We did. And on waiting lists, we haven't made as much progress as I would have liked. But because of the things we are doing, what you have seen over this year is waiting lists are now starting to come down. There is still a way to go. Of course there is. But we will stick to it and I will get it done.
Convinced?
No. So your message to the people who are still on the waiting list is, sorry, but could do better.
What I want to do is make sure they get their treatment as quickly as possible, which is why we're putting more money in, hiring more doctors and nurses, and doing things differently so they can get the care they need in different ways, often outside of hospitals. Now, I can't promise that's going to be solved overnight. And to give you the context here, Ronald, here's the thing that we're grappling with. During the pandemic, 6 million referrals that otherwise would have happened didn't happen. Just think about that for a second. 6 million. Right? And that's what we're now grappling with. Right? That's why the NHS is under the pressure that it's under. 6 million missed referrals that we are now catching up on. Right? So the NHS is doing more today than it's ever done in its history because of the investment we've done and all the improvements we've made.
It's not treating more people.
Yes, the NHS is today carrying out more checks, tests, scans, operations, treatments, appointments than it's done in its history. But when you're dealing with a 6 million missed referrals that we are now catching up on, it is going to take time to get them down.
Let's have this man here in the front.
So I'm glad, Rishi, you said that there is family who has NHS. You say that there is more operations and patients are more. I'm frontline person. I work in NHS. I'm a doctor here. And I am more frustrated now than I was before because every time there is no funding, nothing. Even for children who are having constipation, soiling, they are being called smelly boy, smelly girl in the school. They are saying nurses will not provide the service. How can you say that the parents will be confident who are frustrated now? The NHS staff, the staff morale is all the way down. There is more strike in your period than ever before. What would you say to that people are suffering, the doctors are, the nurses, the therapists, everywhere, the patients are suffering, waiting lists are going up. You said it is going down. I don't know what it said. And then you said 10 billion more investment in your manifesto. What is going to happen? How do we trust? Is it going to happen? And this is, I think, in my view, an eyewash rather than a true deliverable goal.
Well, sir, There is more money going into the NHS today than there has been in its history, and I'm sure BBC Verify after this debate will verify that for you. But that is the fact. But I don't
inflation might have something to do with that.
I absolutely acknowledge your concerns. You and your colleagues are working very hard. You are doing more than we've ever done before. But the situation is challenging because we are dealing with the backlog of missed appointments that you are very well aware of, and I'm sure you were working hard during COVID. You saw what didn't happen during that period. But you talked about parents and children. I'll give you one practical example of something that we're doing that is already making a difference. Now, because of the changes that we've made, if your child has an ear infection, a sore throat, sinusitis, instead of having to make a GP appointment, you can now go direct to your pharmacist to get the medicines that you need. That change that we have made is making an enormous difference already, saving parents an enormous amount of time, making sure their children get the care and the medicines they need much quicker. And if I'm re-elected, we will expand that Pharmacy First programmes to cover more different illnesses. And again, these things all add up. No one thing is going to solve the problem, but it's just a demonstration to you of my commitment to making sure you and everyone else has an NHS that they can rely on, having the peace of mind that it's there for them when they need.
Okay. Bit less frustrated now?
I'm not sure.
OK,
but,
all right, you're not sure. OK, let's take another question. Woman there, yeah.
Employed migrant workers, such as myself or your parents, for example, contribute to our essential services, fill our skill gaps, and contribute taxes as well. Can you tell me how is setting strict migration limits for themselves or their close relatives beneficial when we still have these skill shortages, particularly in the NHS?
Well, ma'am, you're absolutely right. Of course migrants can make a contribution to our country and do, like my parents, as you said, like my grandparents. My point is, though, that the levels of migration that we have seen are too high and they need to come down. And that's what we are now doing. If you look at the number of visas that we've issued at the start of this year, it's down by about 30%. The level of net migration is forecast to halve over the next 12 months. And if I'm elected, there will be a legal migration cap that we vote on in Parliament to guarantee that the numbers come down every year.
But Prime Minister, I think the question here is about how, tell me if I'm paraphrasing this wrong, it's about how to encourage the right kinds of workers here, and if you're not allowing them to bring their families, that is a serious disincentive. I think that's what you're saying, yes?
It is, yeah.
No, well, what we've done...
Do you accept that?
No, but that's not what we've done. What we have done is say that if people are going to bring family members here, they just need to be able to support them. I think that's reasonable, because any person that comes to our country obviously adds to the pressure on public services, and it's a very reasonable proposition to say if people are bringing their dependents, family dependents, then they need to be able to demonstrate that they're going to be able to support them. That is, I think, a very common sense measure, and that's what we are doing.
You wanted to come back
That's okay, I understand that, and I agree with that, but then do you think that social workers, for example, coming from abroad should be paid more in order to be able to support their families, because they won't be able to on the kind of limits that you've put in place? Given their salaries, they won't be able to support their families.
Well, we have a dedicated visa for social care because we know how important it is, and we need to make sure that we do get the right workers here. That's why, unlike almost every other profession that you can think of, there's a dedicated visa for social care workers.
But will they have to abide by this rule about supporting their families as well?
Yes, because what we've seen...
Because the point you're making is they won't necessarily be able to afford to do that on their salary.
And what we've seen is there are lots of people who are prepared to come to our country because it's a fantastic country to fill those vacancies and don't need to bring their family members, and those are the people that we will welcome here. But what we can't do is support an unlimited number of people coming here who are not working. That's just simply not right, and it's not fair. So we may disagree on this, but I do think migration has to come down from the levels we've seen. That's what our migration cap will deliver. That's what we're already doing. And I think basic things like expecting people to support their family if they're bringing them here is actually just fair to everybody, and that's why I believe it's the right thing to do.
Woman here.
Hi. My daughter has lived in Australia, now working in Singapore. In both of those countries, without sponsors or a job, there are no benefits, there's no health care as such, and therefore it attracts people that want to go to work hard to live there. In terms of the UK, we do need migration, especially for the lower paid jobs, because our lazy lot won't do it.
Are you talking about our audience here? I do hope not.
Maybe some of them.
Oh, that's fighting talk, but OK.
Who knows? What I can't grasp is regarding the illegal immigration.
if we didn't have similar policies introduced, perhaps the attraction for the illegal immigrants, they wouldn't go through the torturous journeys that they do, and we'd be in the situation now where most of this election, I feel, is about immigration. And why can we not be stricter as other countries are, and it works?
Yes, well, ma'am, that's exactly what I want to deliver, because you're right. Illegal immigration is wrong. When people jump the queue and come to our country illegally, it undermines the notion, the sense of fairness that our entire country is built on. Right? And of course it puts pressure on public services and it causes security issues, but fundamentally it's wrong and it's unfair. That's why I want to stop it. Now, we've made progress, but in order to fix the problem that you've identified, actually mimicking something that Australia did for a while as well, we need to be able to remove people who come here illegally, send them somewhere else that's safe, because that removes the incentive.
You're talking about
removes the
Rwanda,
incentive
Prime Minister,
for them
yes.
to come in the first place. Now, if I'm your Prime Minister, we have flights ready to go that will take illegal migrants to Rwanda. If Keir Starmer is your Prime Minister, the illegal migrants that we've been detained will be out on the streets, they won't be on those planes. We will become the soft touch of Europe just at a time when multiple other European countries are agreeing that our approach is the right approach. And that's what I want to deliver for you as your Prime Minister if you give me the chance.
And I do believe that you would be able to deliver. Which brings me to my next question.
Oh, yes,
Why
because I
did
must
you
let
bring
other
an
people in as well.
early
Yes.
election?
Why bring an early election? Why did you call the election early?
Well, I called the election because going back to the second question, my number one job when I became your Prime Minister was make sure that we had economic stability. And when we had that, when inflation was effectively back to normal as it was, the economy was growing healthily, wages were rising, I thought that was the right moment for us to consider our future. And you have a choice. You and everyone else has a choice. Okay. Do we build on the progress we've made? I want to keep cutting your taxes. The alternative, if Keir Starmer is your Prime Minister, is that your taxes are going to go up. That is the choice for everyone at this election, and I'm going to fight very hard to make sure that I can continue the work that we've started, continue delivering financial security, continue cutting your taxes.
Are you glad you called the election when you did? How do you think it's going?
It was the right moment to call the election for the reasons that I outlined. And Fiona, I am. Look, of course these things are difficult, but as to actually answer the first question over there, right? When I was standing against Liz Truss in that leadership election, I had the same questions from everybody. You're behind. Why are you bothering? Isn't this all, this is all very difficult? I said, no. Well, I'm fighting for what I believe is right. Right? Even though people didn't want to hear it at the time, I kept going. I kept saying what I thought was right for this country. I kept going to the end. And you know what? I was proved right then. And that's why you can trust me now when I say that what Keir Starmer is promising you is the same fantasy that Liz Truss did, and it's just going to mean your taxes are going to go up, and that matters to me because I don't want that to happen, and that's why we're having this election, and that's what I'm going to keep fighting for.
He obviously disputes that, but let's take a question from Edie Lewis. Edie Lewis. Oh, there you go. It's a little bit further back, look, with the glasses, yeah.
As Labour are predicted to win a landslide victory, do you have any regrets about any actions you've taken during your premiership?
Sorry, what was your name?
Edie.
Edie. Look, I mean,
any regrets, Prime Minister?
Slightly, of course. No one gets everything right, and I've been very open about that, and I completely understand people's frustrations with me, with the Conservative Party, with the last few years.
Do you want to be open about what regrets you might have?
But what this election is about the future. Now, we've been talking about various things, but fundamentally...
Prime Minister, I'm sorry, because that's actually not the question. The question is, do you have any regrets about any decisions taken during your premiership? And you say you've been quite open, so perhaps you could be open with us about what they might be.
Yeah, but everyone have their own views on it, and this is not
What
about
are your
that.
views?
Yeah, well, as I said, I wish we'd made more progress on the waiting list. Okay. I've been very open about that. Right? I wish we had made more progress on the waiting list. It's something that was important to me. We haven't made as much progress as I would have liked. I've explained the reasons, and we're making progress now. But fundamentally, this election is about the future. Right? I've had this job for 18 months. You've seen what I've done. My primary job, the most important task I had was to make sure our economy was back in good health, and it now is. And that's the thing that you have to think about going forward. Right. We're in a position now, as I said I would. I said once we got things back to where they were, we could start cutting your taxes. Okay. And we've put out a proposal, and if you know, this is really important.
Because I think you've made that point already. That's the only thing I was going to say.
But it's important to me because people are asking about the election, right? That is the important issue at stake in this election. I'm going to continue cutting taxes for people at every stage of their lives, Whether you're a pensioner, whether you're in work, whether you're setting up a small business, if you're self-employed, whether you're a young couple trying to buy your first home, I want to cut your taxes and deliver financial security. The alternative is Keir Starmer, who is going to put your taxes up, as we've seen over the last few days.
Which he disputes, I have to say. He's obviously just been here.
Well, he spent the last 3 days avoiding telling anyone about putting up council tax.
All right. And obviously, under
that is what's
Conservatives,
coming, and I'm going to fight very hard to make sure that doesn't happen.
With the biggest tax take under Conservative government, as you know, for many years. Yes.
So I'm just going back a step. Are you really considering leaving the ECHR to push forward your Rwanda policy, which, let's be honest, is devoid of strategic thinking and just is inhumane?
So you're talking about the European Court of Human Rights. So just in case, we're talking about the European Court of Human Rights.
So, you know, do you know what happened last month? 15 other European countries all signed a statement about illegal migration. And do you know what they said? All of them agreed. Italy, Netherlands, lots of other countries. All of them agreed that having the ability to remove illegal migrants to a safe third country was an important part of the solution to this problem because it removes the incentive for them to come in the first place. Right? So you have your view. I
You're
disagree.
being asked, would you leave the European Court of Human Rights?
I'm going to get onto that, but you said that you had a point about the policy. I'm just telling you, I disagree with you. 15 other European countries just a few weeks ago decided that they agree with me. Right? And what I've also been clear... What I've been crystal clear, and that's why we've passed a new piece of legislation to address the concerns of our court, because I respect our court. They raise concerns, that's why we passed a new piece of legislation, and that's why their flights will now go if I'm Prime Minister. And when it comes to the ECHR, I am crystal clear. Right? I believe everything that we are doing is in compliance with our international obligations, but if a foreign court, including the European Court, forces me to choose between our country's national security and membership of that court, I'm going to choose this country's national security every single time.
So when you say it's a foreign court, just to be clear, when you say it's a foreign court, it's a court that we were part of setting up as Great Britain, as the United Kingdom. It also has a British judge sitting on it. So I'm just wondering why you call it a foreign court. It's a court that we were part of establishing.
Yes, but it is in Strasbourg, Fiona. That means that it's not a British court.
But it's not a court that has nothing to do with us. We were absolutely instrumental in setting it out.
My point is very clear. I believe everything we're doing is in compliance with our rules and regulations, but this issue is too important to not to be able to grip. I want to deliver on the thing that I promised you I would deliver on. I want to get these flights off, build this incentive, or remove the incentive, build the deterrent. It's the only way to solve this problem. Now, you and I disagree on that, right? You think it's fine for people to come and they shouldn't be removed. That's your decision. I don't think that's right for our country, and that's why I'm prepared to do what it takes to get this problem resolved.
Sorry, let's go. You're saying you didn't say that.
No, I was saying, are you considering leaving the ECHR?
Well, I think
I did say, but you just put words in my mouth then.
All right, but I appreciate what you're saying.
Yeah.
And there's a man over there looking very keen to say something with a black T-shirt. Yeah. Off you go.
It's just a point I'd like to make. There's only 2 other countries in the world that don't subscribe to the ECHR. Russia and Belarus.
Sir, with the greatest respect, we do not need a foreign court to tell us how to police our borders and our security, right? And I believe that everything we're doing is in compliance with our international obligations. But if I'm put in a position where I'm forced to choose between those things, I'm going to put our country's national security first every single time, and I make absolutely no apology about that.
Shame on you.
I've got about 30 seconds left. Very quick question.
I'm 19, so I'm too old to do national service if you did bring that in, and I'm not looking to get a mortgage in the next parliament, so anything to do with that wouldn't impact me. Is there any policy you can offer me that would positively impact my life and the life of people who are my age?
Forgive me, because we're pretty much out of time. Could you name one?
What, are you studying at the moment? Where are you studying? Here, oh, you're at York Uni?
OK.
And what work
Sadly,
do you want to do?
we don't have time for these niceties. One policy.
You know what? Very simply, when you get your job, I'm going to cut your taxes, you're going to keep more of your money and spend it on whatever you want. There you go.
All right. So, you got something of an answer, so I had to cut it short. That is it for now. Well done for all your stamina, folks, for sticking with the 2 hours. Thank you for your questions. Prime Minister, thank you very much for taking part in this. That is our Leaders special over for now, but don't forget, we have got the Plaid Cymru special on BBC World on Monday. We're back on Thursday for the usual routine, and then Friday with Question Time, and they're both from Birmingham. The first, our usual programme, and then the second, remember, with Nigel Farage of Reform UK and Aidan Ramsey of the Greens. But for now, from all of us here, and Prime Minister, thank you very much. Bye-bye.